Well, how did you end up in Japan in 1986?
1982, I was 22 and I wanted to travel. And also I wanted to study traditional Japanese dance because I was a ballet dancer. So at that time, to get a cultural visa, if you wanted to extend your stay past tourist, I had to be sponsored. Yeah, so I had a Japanese dance teacher in Tokyo.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Can I ask how long you studied dance?
Japanese dance?
Yeah.
I think it was about 3 years, and that's kind of also leads into how I ended up getting on the show.
How did you end up on the show?
So my teacher, have you been to Japan, Joshua?
I have not had the pleasure. I have a crippling fear of flying that I'm trying to get over.
Oh, so do I. So, yeah. So my dance teacher was in Tokyo in a place called Roppongi, and she would sponsor people who have a dance background for cultural visas. And through her, there was another foreigner studying there called a Caucasian guy named, he called himself Genki Frankie from Hollywood. He was actually in Saturday Night Fever. And through him, he suggested that I, sign on with this talent agency, a mother and a daughter, who ran this talent agency in the Roppongi area and had kind of a wide array of foreigners on their books. So when, TV shows needed, people in the background, or you would just write down what you could do, and then they'd call you up if they thought you could fit. So that's how I got on, Takeshi's Castle.
Had you seen, you were in it pretty early up, you were in episode 12. Had you seen the show or even heard of it prior to having been on it?
Yeah, I had. At that time, in early 80s, well, of course the show was on in 86, but even through the 80s, there was a lot of crazy television on in Japan. And so, most of us were actually told up front to watch an episode so we knew what we were in for. And there, in the woman's house, the talent, the booker, actually had an episode on her TV and told people, look, if you're not clued in, you better go and watch what you're in for. So, I had seen the show.
Did you speak, you were there for a long time, I'm guessing, how good were you at speaking the language?
Well, I was there from 82 to 91. And if you got me full of sake, I could speak fairly good Japanese. That helps. But not for the kind of work this was. I mean, they didn't really want anybody who spoke Japanese. I mean, if you were doing extra work, most of the talent was Japanese speaking. So,
well, what all do you remember about the behind the scenes of the show?
Well, I remember taking a bus, and we had to sign a waiver. And one of the questions was, if you could meet Takeshi Kitano, what would you say to him? Everybody wrote down "Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence," or because he had just done the movie. Well, he had done previously the movie with Sakamoto and Bowie. So, but I didn't know how to answer that. I was mostly focused on signing away my rights if I broke my neck. That would be a concern, right?
So you were. I mean, I know that you said that you quit after the third one, but having seen the show, were you like, do I really want to do this show prior to having gone out there, or was it just...
I think we were the first foreigners. I think this was the first group of foreigners on the show. I assume you've watched all episodes. Was there any group of foreigners prior to us?
You were in the first foreigner special. There was a really early episode, like episode 6 or 5, where 3 foreigners were there, but they were married to Japanese women. They were like... They just applied like regular people.
Were they talent, like Chuck Wilson or? No,
they weren't talent. They were like, one of them was a auto mechanic, one was an electrical engineer, and
you have to remember that it was so great being with such a diverse group of people. There were. I didn't realize it. It was kind of the Olympics. Everybody would be carrying their flag and this kind of thing. I got to carry the Canadian flag, which was an honor. But the foreigners that I were with, half of them were drunk. drinking the 1 cup ozeki, on the way out, which is sometimes a wise thing to do. But I think the crew, the Japanese, were just overwhelmed because it was like, yeah, we're going to go. We're going to rip this up. We're going to show who's in charge now. And there were people that were football players. There were people that were professional athletes. There were people that were, very athletic. There were people there that, as I said, the group of foreigners. So we just ran amok, and they had to corral us, just trying to funnel us into the different challenges. So it wasn't that they had to really kind of push people. It was like, yeah, what do you want me to smash into next?
I really wonder about the interpreters on that show. Did you interact much with the interpreters that they had?
Well, the crew, I mean, most of us could communicate pretty well, and then we had our buddies, and I certainly, the crew, the people who were off camera were very cognizant of people being safe, so it on one hand, Josh, you're kept in the dark. You don't know what's coming. They just tell you to run. And if you watch the show, you'll see you're coming up over a hump of dirt, or you're coming around a corner. You're left in the trees. It was a pretty rural area, I remember. So you had no concept of what challenge you were going to be, faced with. The first challenge, of course, was climbing over the slide and then falling into a mud pit. So that wasn't too bad. We could crawl all over each other and do that. But the maze, I didn't know I was going through the maze, but it helped that we had watched the show ahead of time. So we kind of had an idea. And if we heard, I remember kind of going to the back of the line, keep moving back. Because if I heard scream, smash, splash, I thought, okay, maybe this isn't one of the challenges that I want to do.
You were shown in 3, the slope, the water gun fight, and then the maze. You talked a little bit about the slope. How difficult was it to get over that slope? Did you climb up? I know that there were a lot of people like climbing up each other in order to get forming. I guess they were like human ladders to climb up.
Yeah.
What do you remember about the slope and then the water gun fight afterward?
Well, about the slope, the guys were helping the women up. So getting us out of the way because they knew we would be up and over first. I remember just pulling my way up and just saying, sorry. I'm so sorry. And we were pretty cooperative. And then when you got to the top and you saw, oh my God, I got to slide down this wet slope and into this mud pit, you just went for it. But as I said, everyone was pretty cooperative with each other, and we were just laughing, having a great time.
It was kind of like, was it kind of like a summer camp type thing? I don't know if you ever went to summer camp or.
It was chaos.
Oh.
It was chaos. Like I said, people were saying, yeah, we're in this together. Let's show what we're made of. So it was kind of that attitude, and as I said, the crew had. I remember seeing just some people running, even on camera. Just they're trying to shoot someone, and someone would run across the field, and just get that guy out of there, because people were just running around in circles and having a great old time. It's like kids at a summer camp. Yeah, I was fine. I mean, I stood in line and I could assess, and they were pretty cool about saying, look, are you afraid of heights, or are you afraid of, being, underwater, or are you wearing contact lenses? They were pretty good, and they spoke to us in Japanese and in English. So, yeah, we all helped each other out. They had a lot of footage. They had a lot of, it's not an easy thing to film.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they really had to get a lot of, go through all of these sets and set everything up. So we try to all cooperate together and get the stuff in the can.
Do you remember talking to Shingo Yanagasawa after the slope game?
Yeah, Shingo. Yeah, he's got those crazy ears. Shingo was very nice. And do you remember what he asked me?
I remember you saying in English, "Go for the money, the money."
That was part 2 of it. But what he asked me was, "Where are you from?" And I said Nakano Sakawe, which is my train station. right? Which, it's the first question you asked in Japan is where are you from? And I got kind of tired of saying, well, I'm from Canada. So I would just say, well, my apartment's over at Nakano Station over there. And so, and then that would always, I kind of moved out of the realm of being a foreigner into someone else who just lives, who could be your neighbor. So I said Nakano Sakaue. And that kind of got a double take. And then I thought he said, well, why are you here? What's your challenge? And I said, I'm going to go for the money. Yeah, so but he was very nice.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
Did you have any interactions with Chuck Wilson?
Yeah, briefly, everybody knew who he was. Nobody knew why he was in a suit. But he was, the talent. So, yeah, I did. I said, hi, Chuck, how are you? And he was very nice.
The water gun fight.
Yeah, the water gun fight. Yeah, you couldn't win on that one. I mean, you got to crawl up a hill, and they've got these water cannons, and you got to keep your disc dry, and I did lose that one. Pretty early on, but it wasn't Joshua really kind of getting through or winning the game for you to go forward. It was just a matter of numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, but I remember the water gun fight, and then them turning the hose on us, and it was a lot of fun. I think we're just getting so soggy, early on. It just was kind of very wet and miserable. We were told to bring a change of clothes.
Did you choose the clothes you wore? Or did they suggest, hey, maybe wear some kind of costume or something? Because there were a couple of guys wearing, like, American flag suits and things like that. I don't know if they gave you any kind of instructions like that before you went.
Yeah. They said, stand out. You stand a better chance of, they were always dangling the prize in front of us. I think at that time it was only Nijumaen, which was, I think it was only 200,000 yen, about $1,000. But they said, dress up, and I just thought, well, I'm going to be covered in dirt, so I might as well wear black. So, that's what I did. And but I became very good friends with the fellow who was dressed up as a woman with the red bow on his head, the young gay fellow. You
don't have to tell me if you don't want to. His name's not really Kitty Litter.
Kitty Litter.
That's what it said, and that's what it said on the lower screen, and I'm just like, and for years, because I didn't speak Japanese, I couldn't read it at the time, and then years later I kind of learned it well enough to read kana at least, and I'm like, okay, that's not his real name.
I don't think he's a real woman either.
I knew that I didn't know either until I watched it like 3 times.
Oh, really? You couldn't tell?
Well, so the first time I saw the episode, it was dubbed into Spanish.
Oh, wow.
It was which by the way, that's a whole other thing I can tell you about later, but they dubbed it into Spanish, and so I couldn't hear him talking, and so I just thought it was a really tall woman, and then I think either the second or third time it occurred to me, oh, that's a guy in drag, duh.
Yeah. Kitty and I became fast friends because I had a lot of gay friends, but Kitty also had a scene with Shingo, I believe. Kitty gave him a kiss. Kitty asked him, are you a woman? And Kitty says, I'm a man and I'm your lover. And that was a double take there. But I think Kitty Litter, of course, was his drag name, but he was American. He was that flamboyant, though. Walking down the street with him, he got a lot of attention. And he was, out and about as a proud gay man in the 80s in Japan. And I respected him for that. And we were good friends.
Good to hear.
Yeah.
The maze, the Devil's Domain, as it is called, you made it through.
I did. Shockingly. We were up above the hill, and I could hear the 2 pro wrestlers who were in the maze waiting for us. They were banging on a few people went ahead of me, and they were banging on the walls, and I thought, oh, what fresh hell, was waiting for me. But all I saw was the general standing there waiting to help me down the hill, and he was so good looking. He was very nice as well, and so I just went in and just snuck around. I decided to be quiet. And luckily, they did grab a hold of me, and they were wearing They were wearing gloves with black dye, and I think that if you got hit with the dye or hit with the black, you were eliminated or something. It didn't show up because, of course, I was all in black. And then I got through. It was just a blur, like watching it. I think I did pretty well. I think I was one of the few people that actually want to challenge that day. But the pro wrestlers themselves check in later and they say, did we hurt you? Are you okay? You did well. They came up and congratulated me. So they kind of looked menacing on screen, but they were big teddy bears.
That's good to hear. My friend who was also on the show later on in life, met one of them later and said he was like the nicest person ever. So
was it the big bald guy or
big bald guy? Said.
Yeah, I don't know his name.
Strong Congo.
Strong Congo. Well, I got manhandled by Strong Congo. And that was indicative of the crew. So, like I said, when you're shooting, it's a free for all. It's really, you're trying to attack Takeshi's Castle. But when they got the shot, the crew came over and checked on everybody. And as I said, the pro wrestlers came in and said, "Are you okay? Did we hurt your arm?" So that we knew we were in good hands.
They were just scared. Yeah, well, that's good to hear.
But you are scared, because they are banging on the walls and coming after you. So I'm just glad I didn't end up in the water.
Did you? You screamed. Those were real screams of semi-terror, I'm guessing, right?
Did I scream? I don't remember that. When I came out, I went. I was just hopped up on adrenaline. But it was fun, and I'm glad I got through. I've played the tape for some friends back in Canada here. But my friends would say, "What are you doing over there?" And I said, "Well, you wouldn't believe it if I told you." And they said, "Well, okay, what?" And I said, "Well, this is one of the things I did." And I showed it to them, and they said, "Wow, that's pretty crazy." I did go through another challenge.
Which, please hear, which one? And I'll tell you the name.
That was the bridge with having the balls fired at your head.
The Strait of Gibraltar. Yeah.
I guess so, yeah. I made it through halfway, and they were pretty good about not shooting the women. Most of the time they would, aim for the head when it came to the guys. And one guy did one of the guys did get through.
Yep, German dude.
Yeah, he was very nice too. And it was a long fall, but then I knew, I had to be at work. So I had a long way back. So they were, putting us back in a bus back to the closest train station. I forget where it was shot.
Midoriyama, TBS Studios on the Midoriyama lot. So it would have been in...
Okay, all right. I remembered it was I was living in Roppongi at the time, so I remember it was quite a fair distance. Yeah, but the bridge was... I knew there was no way getting over it. I mean, the German fellow got through because he was just so long and lanky. Mm-hmm. You couldn't get over those stones very easily. It was a bit tough. When I watch later episodes, I mean, I think our setup, the set for our particular episode, was quite simple compared to how complicated even the maze that I went through. When I saw in later episodes and later. The sets just became so challenging. I don't know how anybody could have gotten through any of it.
Mm-hmm. I'll ask the big question that everyone wants to know the answer to. Were you hurt, and do you remember if anyone else was hurt?
I was not hurt at all. I could have been. I mean, those stones, that collapse when you're running over the stones. When I watch the episode, I see some people who, just slam their jaw into those. The stones are styrofoam, but there's no way you couldn't have been hurt. I didn't know anybody who got hurt. Yeah, and then it was kind of fun for the next couple of weeks after it aired. People would come up to me and say, "Oh, I remember you." On the train, or in the station or walking around town. "Oh, I saw you on TV." Is that the big question everybody wants to know?
I've literally had people who were on the show ask me, "Do you know if anyone else was hurt on the show?" And yeah, that's the big number one question. More than any other question is what is the injury count? And as far as I know, the injury count's quite low. Talked to one guy who said, "I got sick from the water."
One thing I noticed watching the end of the episode, because I was curious who would win. I don't remember any of those people being that stellar in the some of the stuff I watched. So I think it was just a matter of whoever would hung around till the end, got to ride in those little carts. And I think they didn't get home until probably past midnight, because it was by the time Takeshi shows up, right?
I've heard they filmed them on different days. They would do everything on one day, and then the cart battle was like on a week later, and they would do a bunch of them at once.
Yeah, I think that probably makes sense, because I know Takeshi was very popular at that time, and I think he was shooting other stuff, and then I don't doubt that they brought some people back to come back and challenge him. Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Joshua, if you could interview Kitano, what would you ask him?
I would ask him. That's kind of like saying, well, Josh, what would you want to do if you ever visited the moon? It's like that's never going to happen. So I haven't really put a whole lot of thought into it, but I would ask him what the impetus of the show was, because I know what I've heard. I don't know how much of it's true. I would ask him, what do you think about the fact that I'm an American and I know about this show that theoretically I should not know about, and there are literally millions of people across the world who don't speak Japanese, who don't know anything about Japanese culture, but they know this show. That would be What do you think about that?
Have you tried getting in touch with him?
I have not tried getting in touch with him. I've tried getting in touch with, recently I've been trying to get in touch with the producer and the leader of the attacking commander, and I want to try to get in touch with some of the members of his army, Takeshi's army.
The Gundam.
The Gundam, yes. Anyone who's willing to talk to me who's not like Chairman Mao is okay in my book.
Now, I told you that I figured that the people who made it to the end were just those who hung around, or they had the right look, or they'd done, were just asked to come back. Does it change your opinion of the fellow who won, that maybe he didn't go through all of the challenges and might have just been one of the ones that came back and got a lucky hit on Kitano's disc?
No, it really, because I kind of figured, look, doing the math in my head, it's like, okay, so there's 100 people, there's no, let's say hypothetically 80 make it past the first two games that they'll play once, so that leaves 80 people. Well, all 80 people can't go through the maze. That would take forever. That would, just shooting-wise, would take forever. So, to be honest, no, it really doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, he did it. He got the hit.
He got the hit, yeah. So,
give the guy a car. I mean, the revenue that show was bringing in, I think was so considerable that the fact that he, got $1 million yen, good on him, We were all paid to go, of course. I think we were paid about $200 to go, about 20,000, nijumang, or nimayen. So, it was a nice day of, running around outside. You surprised me, though, that so many people liked this show when I posted that I was the woman at such and such time. The response I got was quite surprising. I thought, what?
Oh, yeah. America, Canada, you've seen the American edit, right?
Yeah, the Most Extreme Elimination Challenge?
Yeah. You were never part of it. They never edited you into it, but I've talked to people who were edited into it. That's another fun conversation. America, Canada, England, Germany, Greece, Spain, Italy, Iran, Australia, New Zealand, Brazil, Mexico. I'm only naming a fraction of the countries where this show has aired.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is amazing, and I was so happy to hear from you too, because not many people really, they would. I think Most Extreme Elimination Challenge certainly played. I remember watching it here in Canada, and I was hoping that my episode would come up, but the overdubbing was so much fun, so that was a hoot. I got to say, with Takeshi's Castle, they took a formula that was kind of basic, throwing people into these challenges, and then they had all these characters, and they had, like you said, the Gundam, and they had lots of kind of side characters. Is it Guy Ledouche?
He is Guy Ledouche in the MXC dub, which the Someone pointed out to me, it's not dirty. It's not dirty. It's shower in French. His name is Guy Le Shower. There's absolutely nothing dirty about that. You sicko.
I'm French, I know.
Yeah.
I know. I should mention something else too. So I told you that I had a second job that day, and I was a hostess in Ginza. And I'd heard that on one of my nights off, Kitano actually did come into my club, and I missed it.
Aw.
But, he was quite intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
He's an intimidating guy. To me, he's self-made man. I respect that completely. He came up as Beat Takeshi and was in a Manzai group, of course. So I wouldn't have known exactly what to say to him. I'm not easily intimidated because I did talk to a number of kind of heavy hitters when I was a hostess. But I'd heard that because I had shot the show, and then he'd come in on one of my nights off. So I just thought I'd throw that at you.
It's nice that it's weird how small the world is.
Well, yeah, that's a small world, and I think that Ginza at that time in the 80s was a wonderful gig. Japan at that time was just going through this incredible wealthy stretch, and being a hostess, it was really fascinating to meet a lot of really, really powerful people.
Any names you want to drop for that, or do you want to keep that private?
Names that wouldn't mean much to you, but certainly politicians. They would bring international, people. People go to hostess bars not to do business, but to kind of forge social relationships. So my job was to, smooth that out and to keep the drinks flowing and to keep the conversation flowing. Know when to keep your mouth shut, know when to light a cigarette, that kind of thing. Yeah, it was, and being a hostess, a lot of people confuse it with another side of the work, which means, prostitutes or whatever else. But that never occurred in the clubs I worked in. Japanese have a long history of having hostess bars, but also, all sorts of ways for men to get into trouble. And certainly they didn't need to go to hostess to chase a hostess. If they wanted to have a relationship, they could certainly go elsewhere. So one of the problems I always had is if a foreigner did come in and I was seated with them, that they would say, well, okay, what are you doing after work? And I'd say, I'd go home. I'm going home. And they said, oh, you're not employed by the club. And I said, I am, but I'm not. When I leave out here, it's nobody's business. So, yeah, but I got to meet some very, very interesting people. And, a lot of those Japanese men in the 80s, those businessmen, they were tired. I mean, the last thing they want to do is sit there and drink and talk to a pretty girl. They want to go home with their families, but it's what they had to do. Yeah. So it was fun. I wouldn't have changed that. I was a hostess for 4 years, and I really enjoyed it.
Good. That's good to hear.
Yeah, it was. But I didn't work with a lot of foreign women. I worked mostly in bars that I was the only foreigner, because a lot of the foreign girls, there certainly were bars where there was a lot of foreign women working, but they brought the police because you weren't allowed to work in a bar at that time. It was illegal. So, they would bring the heat, and it just got too complicated, and they were sometimes not straight in the head, or did they hooked on the side, and I just didn't want to be associated with that.
Foreigners weren't allowed to work in bars, women weren't allowed to work in bars, or some combination of those two?
Combination of those. The Japanese are very good at looking the other way until there's trouble. I didn't associate with a lot of foreigners. Most of my friends were Japanese. As I say, I was studying dance. I kind of kept my head down and just got on with my life. I didn't go to a lot of the foreign pubs or whatever else, just because I found that, as a foreign woman, it was not as easy as if you were a foreign man living in Japan. So, I did have a boyfriend at the time, and one of the men I met in my bar was I don't know if you know the term dana. Adana. Adana is somebody who, is not like a sponsor, but he was my boyfriend, and he helped me with my apartment and whatever else, and we liked each other very, very much. I loved him, and so I could do what I wanted during the day, and if I worked, I worked. If I didn't, I didn't. So yeah, it was a very nice time. The 80s was wonderful, and I was kind of a cultural. I guess like yourself, someone who's kind of standing back and looking at this swirl of this culture just kind of going around you and just kind of being in wonder of all of it.
In regards to the swirl, I know that you did a lot of modeling, but I know you had to have done other television shows. Do you remember any of the other Japanese shows you were on? We certainly don't have to go over all of them, because I'm sure there were many.
I mostly did background work for walk-ons, like I was a stewardess, or I was just kind of in the background. I did some Japanese dance in the background and whatever else, but I didn't do a lot of TV. What I ended up doing was trade shows, so going and standing next to a car or giving out a product to trade, for trade shows. So there was a lock company, there was a beef company, and they would go through the talent agency and just say, yep, well, there's someone here. And because I could work when I wanted to, I could, go out to the trade center and stand around for a day and meet people.
How would you overall rate the experience of having been on Takeshi's Castle?
Oh, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun, and I was glad that a friend of mine, actually, you'd asked me if I had a copy of the original. I did. I moved a couple of times, and it's somewhere, but I have a VHS copy. But I don't have a CD, and mine was in Japanese. Mine wasn't dubbed into the British version. That I got to mention too. I took a couple of rolls of film with me, and I shot the hell out of that show. Like, I have off-camera stuff, I have background stuff, I have, I don't know if you might want to see some of that.
Yeah. I thrive. I'm literally, anytime someone has photos from behind the scene of that show, I get excited. Yes, I would love to see.
Now, I have to dig through my stuff. I know I have some pictures here floating around, and I can just do a screen grab and send something off to you. But at that time, I was shooting stuff on film, on slide film, just because I really liked, doing a full-size wall picture, of what was going on. So I have to find that. So even if it takes 6 months, I'll put it in the back of my, put it in the hard drive. I'll remember it. Well, those were the days of the big budgets, right?
Yes.
And things were, sometimes I was shocked. A lot of times, I'm not shocked easily either. And I remember, just to draw that point, is that I was with the Japanese family at New Year's, and they had kindly invited me over. And, we had this big New Year's dinner. We went to the temple. That's what you do at midnight. You pray for a safe New Year. You give thanks for your last year, and then they have this huge spread. And what NHK did was do this red and white contest, and then they had all of these famous people either on the red team or the white team, and people would be watching this while eating before going to the temple. And so it was quite interesting, because if you could imagine, like, Brad Pitt balancing an egg on a spoon and running, on a tricycle going, it was just craziness. And I remember that because of the 80s, there was a lot of nudity on the screens, especially from the waist up. I think Chuck Wilson mentioned this in his interview, or you had interviewed someone else who was a Mormon. And God bless the Mormons. I can tell you a couple stories about them, but this woman came on with this foreign woman came on with these huge breasts. Obviously, she had implants. And this was entertainment. And here I am sitting there with, grandma's there, grandpa's there, mom and dad, the kids, everybody. And they all slowly turned to look at me, and I'm just eating my fish head. And I just thought, it's just too much. There's no limit to this, and that's definitely true of the 80s on TV in Japan. It just got so crazy. And that went with the game shows too. I mean, people were made to sit in boiling hot water or these big pieces of ice, and especially the gundang. I just thought it was cruel.
The comedy is a completely different beast in Japan than it is here in the United States and Canada. There's none of no comedian here would sit in an apartment with no food for humor.
Yeah, it was cruel, and I would ask my friends about it, and they said, "Well, we don't know what the heck's going on either. Like what's the lowest common denominator? We've been fed this because they think this is what we want, or is this indicative of our culture, how it's become so decadent?" And I said, well, that's for you guys to answer. But as a foreigner, I can, if you're asking me, it shows that you guys are just mental, and at that time, and one of the reasons I did the trade shows is because they were trying to basically come out of, they'd had the Olympics in '64, but Japan was so wealthy in the '80s that they were really going into the States and certainly Canada here, and there was a Japanese way of doing business and marketing, and a lot of people, especially throughout Australia, Philippines, Thailand, China, had very bad memories of what occurred during the Second World War. And so what Japan was trying to do was kind of reach out, and sometimes they were exploitive too, buying up factories. They were not dumb. But there was a lot of resentment. And so I was very aware of that political element. So Japan was coming out of kind of a form of isolation. And I wasn't surprised in the 90s when the economy started to crash. That's when I left. I was no longer, young and marketable. I was 31 when I came back. And there was still a lot of resentment. When Japan started crashing, they had no friends politically, And the school books were altered. What happened during the Second World War and throughout Asia, the Japanese weren't told about this.
Did they change it? They just removed the whole World War II story from the books, or did they change it? Did they try to depict Japan more positively or negatively during the war? Because I know there was a lot of...
Oh, positively, of course. I don't think they even reported what went on. And so when you tried to have a conversation, I was close to some Japanese people, and I had some Japanese boyfriends, and I would say, there are views in the world that the Japanese army didn't really have to be as cruel as they were to some people, or do military experiments, or the rape of Nanking. And the people would say, "What are you talking about?" I go, "What do you mean? What am I talking about?" And then they'd say, "Oh, it's just propaganda." And I said, No, don't go there with me. I'm on your side. I'm living in your country. I'm paying tax. I've been here a long time, and you guys have to kind of be open-minded. Germany certainly was.
Yeah.
So, so I think that the 80s was interesting for that time too, because I would be giving out, oh gosh, you name it, an American cheese product. And somebody, an old Japanese guy would say, "I don't want that garbage, damn Americans." And I'd go, "Hey, I'm Canadian." "Oh, okay, that's all right then." I always had a little Canadian pin on my lapel when I went into those kinds of shows. Hey, look at this, I'm a friend.
Did you? I know you talked about how you changed it from "I'm from Canada" to "I'm from apartment near this train station." Did you ever get a lot of people just assuming you're American, because you're not Japanese?
I got that a lot, but don't forget, Americans had, and still do, have very large army bases in Japan. So they would just assume by numbers, that you were American. But a very clear distinction, which gave us Canadians a big step up, was that Canada, because it was so well looked upon by Japan, had a special visa given to us. So it was Canada, Australia, and New Zealand had something called a working holiday visa. So that caused a huge influx of Canadians coming in. And we spoke, I don't know if I have an accent to you, but the West Coast of Canada has almost a British accent. So they would choose me over someone else because of I don't have like a Kentucky accent or something like that. So there was an influx of Canadians because the working holiday visa came in. I think it was about 80, maybe 84 or 85, which meant that we could work anywhere and do anything. And any other country couldn't, except Australia and New Zealand. So Canadians were looked upon very favorably by the Japanese, and we've had a long history with the Japanese in Canada here.
There was a game show that came out of Canada, and I'm sure you never saw it, that I'm still very bitter about. It was called, and I love Canadian game shows, but this one was a parody of a Japanese game show that they didn't point out, and this aired on like children's television. I'm like, this is allowable? This was like 5 years ago. It was called, and I quote, Japanesey Going Gong.
I think I saw it. It was fantastic.
You liked it?
Yeah.
Okay.
There was another one, I think that, I don't know if it was CBC, the Canada Film Board, or the Canada Broadcasting Company, which is the Canadian version of NHK, Nippon Television. But they did an Ultraman translation, and that was a hoot. Have you seen that one?
You're talking the Ultraman series that aired in the you're talking about they dubbed the 67 series into English in Canada?
Yeah, I think so.
They aired that in America. I didn't see it, but that's the version that aired in the United States.
It was so funny. It was so funny. Hi, we're young Japanese. You'd have before they transform into their characters. Hi, we're young Japanese having a picnic because we're so wholesome. So it was just chaos, and it was just a hoot. The translation was right on. Especially, it was a lot like the Most Extreme Elimination Challenge. That was great writing. And I also think that I, in some way, contributed to Wipeout, which is one of my favorite shows. I would never go on Wipeout, even if I was, in my 20s, because that is just violence. I just cringe. But I like to think that Takeshi's Castle kind of started all of that. Yeah, I could see them being hit. Like, I don't know what their waiver's like for injury, but, people take some serious hits on that show.
One guy died.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
He had a breathing condition that he didn't tell them about, and so that's what happened. And that was on the American version, by the way.
Wow. There's some people that shouldn't be on that course. They're so overweight, or obviously, I don't think they've been clued in, and just they slam into a wall full blast. And I just think, wow, that must have had some long-lasting damage, I wanted to ask you as well, are you aware of the difference between the Tokyo game shows and the Osaka game shows?
Only in that I know that there's some difference in the names of the stations, but if you said, what's the difference between, I would not know, and off the top of my head, I'd love to hear it.
Well, there's two shows that come to mind, and I'll start with one. Do you know the Manzai team called the Tunnels?
Yes.
Okay, because there's a guy named Takaaki Ishibashi. He did the Major League movies and whatever else, and I think he was a member of the Tunnels. And there was a game show I loved. Well, there's two that I loved. One, though, was, if you can help me with this, I'd love it, because I'd love a copy of some of it. So it's a dating show, and they do a lineup of young women and a lineup of young men, and the guys have got their cars. And so I think there's like 20 women lined up and 20 men lined up. And what typically happened, or at least in the first episodes, is where if one of the guys spied a young woman he was interested in, he'd walk up to her, and the two lines are separated, they're in a field, and he'd walk up to her, and then if another guy was interested, if she was particularly pretty or comely or whatever else, another guy would say, "Chotomate, just a minute," and he'd run up, and there'd be this lineup, and then they'd have to give her their best line. And then she would choose which suitor she liked the best, and they'd go for a drive in his car. up, to some pre-chosen place, and they would have a date, and in the end, the couples would have to do these challenges. Excuse me, it was so much fun. That doesn't ring a bell, eh?
It does not ring a bell. I can look for it though, I'm sure.
And I think it was Kansai. I think it was TV Kansai. Because, of course, when you're living in Kansai, like I did, I lived in Osaka and Kyoto as well, and I seem to remember that show. The second show I liked came on Sunday mornings, and if you were hungover, it was a balm for your soul. It was called Proud Village Singing Contest, and what they do is they just go to some backwater somewhere and set up the cameras, and it was like a gong show, but they were very kind. And some of these people way out in these small towns were incredibly talented. Of course, everybody was singing karaoke every night. That's all there is to do out there, right? But it was called Proud Village Singing Contest. And you'd have Grandpa stand up, and he could belt it out. You'd have these kids doing these teen idol songs, and some grandma singing a traditional song. Minyo, it's called Minyo, is kind of a traditional song. And it was wonderful because you'd be so hungover with a tin of cold Coke in your hand trying to recover and watch Proud Village Singing Contest every Sunday morning.
That I'm familiar with, but only because I have the scholarly book on Japanese television where they heavily discuss the singing shows of the 80s and 90s. Let me rephrase that. The amateur singing shows of the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, it was wonderful. It was wonderful because you weren't up to speed by that point. I don't know if you drank or not, but Japanese alcohol is ruinous, and it was really nice to watch. The other thing they used to do is these family shows, and they would actually have the kids dressed up in these cardboard outfits, and they'd turn into Transformers and make, each family would come on and do these incredibly complicated structures, and then it was beyond fascinating. I don't know if that rings a bell either.
Oh, very, very, very. That one. Whereas the first one you mentioned doesn't ring a bell at all. This one doesn't ring any. They ring slight bells, but not enough to where I could give you even a title or who would have been in it.
Well, there was no talent in it. It was just, it's like America's Got Talent. How would you explain that, right? So you have large numbers of people coming in. They've got 2 minutes or they've got 30 seconds to have a bunch of kids in boxes, and then they transform into an 8-foot robot, and they walk around. I mean, you don't really know how it was done, and a lot of people, at home kind of made up these, little skits, but what was amazing is the fact that it was amazing. Your jaw dropped. So, the Japanese are very creative that way. It doesn't all have to be boobies and the Friday night show or whatever it was called with Uncle Dirty. I don't know if you've heard that name before. There was a Tokyo guy, and he had slick back hair, part down the middle, and I think he was called Uncle Dirty. It was the 11 p.m. show, and it just was so horrible.
I try to avoid I'll be blunt, and I don't know a lot about them. I try to avoid anything that's heavily sexually oriented. Although not that Takeshi's Castle, but that's like super innocent, the jokes they make on that show compared to some of the other stuff. Yeah,
it's all toilet humor. And that's fine, because let's face it, they had to produce a lot of product quickly. So, toilet humor is the go-to, right? And the Japanese are as body. A lot of people think the Japanese are conservative. They're not. They're as body, and they love a good dirty joke as much as anyone else. So, but, you can only show boobs for so long, right? They couldn't go anywhere else. There was nothing else to show. So I think that genre kind of burned itself out pretty fast.